Hi, friends. Hope you're doing well. Want to do a video. This is kind of on the deal that's going on with recently in the political realms, which I don't delve in that much, but I think it's important too because of the Biden's abandonment of Israel in a sense, and his so-called ironclad support. That shows how untrustworthy he is and how he's got no commitment to him at all. He's got no bones about leaving people that America says they're going to support out to dry, and in general, the embracement by the left of the terrorists. They're basically supporting the terrorists while they're claiming that Israel's the enemy, that is the bad guy, the terrorist who's doing evil. And it's like just the opposite of what's true. And basically the demonization of Israel and in general the Jewish people, which is a continuation of the satanic lie of the destruction of the Jewish people, a desire to destroy the Jewish people, which I think is a spiritual battle that is raving all around us. And I think it's pointing to the end times. I think it's pointing to the end of this age. This is just one of those things where you can see around the world this movement by the left in general being used as tools of Satan, I believe, to do the Islamic bidding, which is the destruction of Israel, destruction of Jewish people. And I think that is in general, the desire of Satan, and has always been. And that's why we see these programs that's taking place periodically throughout the centuries, expulsion from nations, and systematic murder and destruction of the Jewish people and their enclaves where they're at. They'll live in peace for a period of time, and then suddenly a king or a kingdom will rise up and try to destroy them. Usually it's somebody who ultimately is inherently evil and wishes their death and demise for whatever reason. And you see that periodically. And with Biden, it's kind of like that. And then with the left, it's happening right now in America, which is, it doesn't shock me because I said, if you go back and look at some of my videos before, I said, as we move closer in time, you're going to have to see around the nations, around the world, where the Jews are being forced back into their country. You're going to see more and more Jews return back to Israel because it won't be safe in the Gentile nations where they had once lived in the West. And most people look at it and go, well, you're crazy. How has it? Jews have lived there for years, centuries, and they've been perfectly fine. And the West has been blessed in many ways to allow for that to take place. But we're seeing that. We're seeing that in Europe, Jews in France, Jews even in England and other places where they're feeling unsafe, insecure, and many of them are wanting to move back to Israel, and some have moved back to Israel. And now, America was often viewed as that last bastion of safety for the Jewish people, and that facade that many Jews believed is now being ripped away, and they realize, that there's a reason why you need a Jewish state. There's a reason why you need it after the Holocaust. The Jews who lived through that, nightmare realized the need for a Jewish state to protect them, where they had some kind of protection against those who wished to destroy them because of this demonic deception or whatever it is that's in their mind that wishes to destroy Jewish people. And that's one thing that is taking place right now in America. You see this craziness that's happening on the universities and throughout the left in general, who seems to have embraced this lie, and it basically starts with a lie, which tells you where it's coming from. The father of all lies is Satan, obviously. As Jesus said, he's the father of all lies. He's a murderer from the beginning. And it's true. He wishes the death of anyone who wishes to serve God. And he wishes the destruction of the Jewish people to combat his own demise ultimately, because when Jesus returns, he's coming back and establishes his kingdom, an eternal kingdom. And part of that will be the restoration of Israel. And if there is no Israel, if there's no Jewish people, then obviously there's no return of the Messiah. And that's one of the things that we see. We see they're trying to use these people, these puppets, who are in general irreligious people, unbelievers who don't understand anything about God or the Bible, and in general reject it wholeheartedly. And those are the ones that are being used by the left in general to embrace the terrorists while rejecting those who are wishing to have freedom and life and liberty. And that's the complete opposite. You're basically calling good evil and evil good, just like the Bible warned about in the book of Isaiah. So here we are. We got Biden saying, hey, I'm going to give Israel ironclad support, which shows you why anybody would have to be crazy to support the Democratic Party in any way, shape, form, or fashion. They are doing everything they can to destroy this country, destroy what made it great. And they've even confused the minds of the youth in general, but even people now who are older, that to throw away your heritage, your Judeo-Christian heritage, which is what really made the West great. That it was this belief that there was a God who created us and gave us his favor, and gave us the ability to love and cherish life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness and the desire to establish a freedom-loving society that was based upon hard work, getting ahead, fair play, treat others as you'd like to be treated, don't steal, don't rob, don't hurt other people. And that's all been pushed out when they removed the Bible and prayer out of school. And then they induced the minds of these young people to embrace humanism and drugs and that whole drug culture, and drop in and drop out became from O'Leary, who made that famous in the 60s. And it was just the craziness of that hippie culture of drugs and rock music and all this stuff. And it was basically to seduce the minds of the youth, but they needed to remove religion. They needed to remove the Bible and prayer and the concept that God was the creator of all things, and that he loved them, he cared about them, and he wanted them to have life. And instead, they've kind of like, hey, no, if you really want this, you got to get rid of these crazy ideals. You need to believe in evolution and all these false left liberal ideals. And it's coming home to roost right now. This is the people that that's been indoctrinated for so long in these public school systems of terrible stuff that they're teaching. And now you got people like Biden, who is, basically stating things that are insane. And he comes across insane in a way. I mean, anybody who's got any common sense. I mean, if you evaluate what Biden said, if we just broke that down for a second, he's basically saying, look, I support you, got ironclad support. And then the moment Israel has them, has Hamas blocked into one enclave and say, hey, we're going to go into the city and we're going to root out this final bastion. And as well, there's 1.5 million so-called Palestinians, which again is based upon a lie. There is no such thing as Palestinian people. There's no Palestinian culture, no Palestinian language. Historically, there's no Palestinian people. Palestine is a made up element from when you have basically, and I won't get into the whole thing, but basically in general, it's the League of Nations who basically supported the reestablishment of Jewish people in the Jewish homeland, because they realized the problem that the Jews had throughout Europe of being murdered and killed systematically throughout the centuries, and that there needed to be a Jewish land, and they want to support this. And this League of Nations basically gave what is the British Mandate. And the British Mandate was basically a colonial concept, and that was when they were basically dividing up all these lands in the Middle East. They created Transjordan, which became Jordan. They created Iraq. They created modern-day Syria, Lebanon, so forth. All these nations were created as a colonial construct ideal that they were going to put together these nation states of these warring tribes of Arabs, primarily Arabs, and they were going to return the Jewish people back to their original historic homeland, which was Israel, Judea, Samaria. And that's how that whole concept, and the world supported this in general. And once that happened, you had the fall of the Ottoman Empire. You had the decline of many of these Arab powers like Egypt and so forth, who really suffered during this period of time of destruction and war that had killed so many people and destroyed so many nation states, and had really destroyed much of the economies of the world. And then you ultimately followed that by having the Great Depression that took place. So you had so much unemployment, so much want, so much hurt, so much suffering. And so when the British were building this state, and by the way, they gave away half of the land that was promised to the Jewish people, which became Transjordan. So they've already given away half the land that was designed and given to the Jewish people. So they've already given that away. And by the way, Transjordan became Jordan. 50% of their population is so-called Palestinian, or self-identified Palestinians. So they already have half of the land that was promised to the Jewish people. And by the way, they have a functioning state called Jordan. Most people don't know that. 50% of the population of Jordan is Palestinian. And they got that land exactly at the same time that the Jewish people was promised their land. Only they wanted to give it away. The British gave that away to the so-called Jordanians, which is basically another Arab tribe, the Hashemite kingdom. And anyway, they their own people, 50% of it is Palestinian. And by the way, the Palestinian PLO was kicked out of Jordan because they tried to take over the government by their own king, who kicked them out. So, and the same thing happened where wherever they've gone. They were kicked out of Kuwait. They were kicked out of various nation states throughout the Middle East. Nobody trusts them. And again, they're not a true historical people. It's completely made up, fabricated. They're migrant Arabs, and that's what they are, Arabs, from either Egyptian or surrounding nation states. That was where they originally were from. That's where their grandparents or great grandparents were from, and they basically migrated there for jobs and money, and so they were working for the British by and large. And then ultimately after the 1948 or the establishment of the Jewish state, 1948 war, and Israel won when all the Arab nations were going to destroy it because they disagreed with it, and they didn't want the Jewish people. They're primarily driven by their Islamic societies who believe that the Jewish people had to die for the end times to come take place. So they want to destroy the Jewish people, and that's what motivates them. It's religiously motivated by political expediency, as were nation states, using their political model or might and armies against this people, but it's religiously and philosophically driven. They believe that the Jewish people have to be destroyed and the Jewish murdered for ultimately the Islamic return of the end times and so forth, the establishment of their Mahdi and everything else. Well, that's what's driving this whole concept of the destruction of the Jewish people. It has nothing to do with the fact that the Jews have done anything inherently bad or wrong. They're just building a society. And in fact, it's a flourishing society. You know, that's helping many other people, doctors and medicines and, you know, entrepreneurship and everything that's there, a lot of, and freedom and so forth. There's a lot of that in Israel. Now, they get some things wrong. Don't get me wrong. I see the way Jews talk about Christians behind their back and call them Nazis. I see the way they insult, attack Christians behind their back. So they have their own problems where they're completely hypocritical and wrong in many ways. And the Jews, when they see that, should condemn that kind of behavior. I've seen where they assault Christians who are speaking on the street and trying to share the good news, not hurting anybody, just simply sharing the good news of Christ with them, and literally hit them in the head, knock them down, assault them. You know, they're just as bad as the Nazis that were doing it to them, and yet they claim that they're doing it because they love God too. They're just as guilty as the people who go and do suicide bombings and kill people in their own land. They're just as guilty. So Israel isn't completely innocent by any means. The Jewish people is not completely innocent. There's some bad people there too that need to be addressed by their own people. But in general, the Jewish people are correct and right in their argumentation of that is their land, and historically is their land. All of it, Judea, Samaria, Gaza, all that land belongs to them. If you go and do any kind of archaeological digs and look at any manuscripts and so forth, you don't dig up pottery that's of Palestinians. You dig up pottery that has Jewish writings on it. You find coins that's either, from the old Roman Empire or whatever empire, but ultimately in that you ultimately will find support for the Jewish people being in that land. That's just a fact, and it validates what the Bible talks about as a historical document as well. And that's what the Bible really is in many ways. It's a religious text, but it's historically validated in what we see archaeologically, manuscript-wise, and so forth. All of that is true, which brings us back to where we're at today. We have a president of the United States who says that he's the great supporter, America's great supporter of Israel. But yet we have a president who basically says, you got this ironclad support for us. By the way, we're not going to support you as soon as you go into the final enclave to destroy this terrible group of people that murdered 1,200 Israelis, including babies, kidnapped over 200 plus 240 innocent men, women, and children, and dragged them off to God knows where, and many of them have been murdered and killed. Can you imagine? And these are the people that the protesters are supporting, and they're saying, "Oh, well, hey, anything goes because they're being oppressed, and they're not being oppressed. They have, number one, they have their own. They were an autonomous rule from 2005, and if you really want to get back before it, when they were under 1967 and so forth, the Gaza was under Egyptian rule. Nobody was talking about Palestinian state, and it's so-called West Bank. It's not West Bank. It's Judea and Samaria, where you get Judea is where you get the name ultimately Jew, and historically it is Judea and Samaria. They called it West Bank because at one point Jordan, Transjordan before that, had control of that land before they lost it. That's what they call it. It's not the West Bank, it's Judea and Samaria. But the people forget all those historical realities. And it was under Jordanian control. And they weren't talking about having a uh, Palestinian state. That was never even mentioned by the Jordanians. Nobody talked about that. In fact, kids who were born, the so-called Palestinian Arab, the Arabs who were born in the West Bank under Jordanian control, had Jordanian passports. The people who, the so-called Palestinians who were born in Gaza, guess what they had? Egyptian passports. They weren't considered Palestinians because that wasn't a recognized people group. It wasn't until really Yasser Arafat, the father of the Palestinian cause, as it were, he was an Egyptian. His parents were Egyptian, and he basically came out and said, "Hey, we're Palestinians," and it kind of caught on in the early '60s. And so you had this group of people that called themselves the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which is a terrorist organization. He blew up civilian planes. He sent terrorist people to go and kill people and shoot people on buses. He had terrorists throw grenades into where civilians were sitting. And nothing changed when Hamas came into power. When Fatah took over and they were killing people too and sending suicide bombers. And then Hamas came on the scene and basically wound up killing many of the Fatah leaders and so forth people. And then they went and did the exact same thing. They basically sent suicide bombers to go kill indiscriminately civilians. When they launched those rockets almost every month or every other month or every third month or whatever, they send rockets out, a barrage rockets. They just sent them indiscriminately and to kill civilians or anybody else. They weren't targeting military targets. When they go and blow up a bus full of civilians, who do you think they were killing? Military people? If there was 3 or 4 military people on that bus, it's justified in killing the other 100 people that was on that bus or injuring them. And when they would do those car terrorist attacks and they would take the car and just run people over, it wasn't always soldiers. It was just a guy driving on, walking along. How about the ones where they'd sit there and pelt them with rocks and then drag them out and kill them and shoot them in broad daylight? Those are civilians. They just had to be Jewish. They weren't soldiers. Nobody talks about that. How about when they were launching balloons full with incinerators and they were sending them over out of Gaza when they had autonomous rule, by the way. Jews had already given autonomous rule. They were sending fire bombs by balloons over with the wind just carried into Israel. And these incinerators would catch on fire, eventually float down, and that would catch on the fields and they catch on forests. And where's the ecologists and the hyper people who worried about the environment? Where's all that at? It's like they burned down forests and they'd burn down wheat fields and they burned down all kinds of stuff that in Israel. Nobody's talking about that. Houses, so forth. Where was the concern about the civilians that they were hurting, the animal life they were killing, the forest that they were burning up? They've been there for hundreds and even thousands of years. Where's and it was just being done by terrorists who had autonomous rule, by the way. And they keep saying, we're oppressed, and people believe it. Why do you think they keep doing that? And then you got the media like CNN and other groups who have been caught. That's why they were kicked out of Israel. They were caught paying for staging false uprisings, where they would bring out tires and have some Palestinians dance around, and these tires would be burning with black smoke, and the photographer would be filming like there's this great uprising and they're being oppressed and throwing rocks. And if you panned around and the Israelis were showing in the background, there was nobody behind them. There's nobody oppressing these people. There's nothing there. There's no soldiers confronting them or anything. They just set this up randomly on a street and a road and had these Palestinians throwing rocks at nobody and acting like they're getting pelted and so forth, when in fact it's just the smoke from the tires blowing around. And that it was false, phony, fake narratives by these reporters who obviously had to keep their job, had to follow and promote this lie. Why? These people are the ones who are contributing to the violence and the murder and the death that took place. This lie helped promote that lie to the so-called Palestinian people to go out and commit these murders acts against civilians who didn't do anything to anybody. And they settled in their own land. That is historically their land. All that land, including Gaza, is actually belonged to the Jewish people of Israel. And those so-called Israel, they say, they're Ashkenazi Jews. They're not real Jews. They have no idea what they're talking about. The Jews were forcibly removed and taken off into slavery into Europe. But, well over 1 million. Some put it at 1.5 million plus. They were taken off as slaves into Europe. And that's why you have all these enclaves of Jews, Jewish enclaves throughout Europe. They were slaves who've ultimately got their freedom. And eventually, after the Holocaust, the world woke up and realized, hey, we can't ever let this happen again. The hatred, the venom, the evil that's in the minds and hearts of people who were seduced by Satan. And at the time, Europe understood it because there was a Christian identity and heritage there still remaining, realized they had to establish a national state that the Jews could protect themselves. And so they established a Jewish state. And the same thing's happening in America. You have these young people who have lost their historical and their heritage of a Christian identity and truth that made America great. They've lost that because they've been indoctrinated in these filthy public school system, which is indoctrinating this filth of lies and humanism, and based upon a lie of deception of self-creating matter of naturalism. And they basically tell them you've evolved from apes, so therefore you can some species of banana tree or something that somehow this is you're equivalent to a fern tree. That's basically what they teach these kids. So they wonder why they act like animals. You basically you're just a higher evolved species of an animal. You're nothing more than that. And they just lie to them that you have no intrinsic value other than that, and do right just for the sake of doing right because and by the way, we determine what is right. Well, no, there's something much greater than us, the one who created us, and nothing comes from nothing. We know that. And the whole lie of evolution is just that. It's a lie. And there's many, many, many documents about that. But evolution is a lie and a deception. And this whole concept of secular humanism and the whole concept that basically we can, that everything's relevant and so forth, relativism that's being taught, to these kids, all lies. And it's all being bombarded with these lies upon these young minds to believe these lies. And so you end up with a person and people like we see in the Democratic Party primarily. The Republican Party supported too. They just hide behind, their conservatism or whatever. So I'm not saying politics is going to save the day, but they're inherently evil in the Democratic Party and those who support them. They're globalist. And these globalist groups out there like George Soros, who's some of these people? George Soros, the Rockefellers brothers, the Bill Gates, what's some of the other ones? That I can't remember the names of some of the other ones, but anyway, these are some of the ones who've come out recently. I think Ted Cruz called out some of those, that were basically supporting these Palestinian uprisings around, in universities and causing all this problem. And then you got unlimited immigration coming in. And these people aren't just all coming from, South America, Central America, Mexico, so forth. Most of those are coming here just to have better jobs. But you have to control your borders ultimately or you don't have a country. And when you got people coming from China and, Iran and Russia and so forth, and and I have nothing against those states. We want all people to become Christians. But when you have people with bad intentions coming into your country, that's the reason why God created nation states. And he did that through the Tower of Babel, just the confusion of languages. Nation states were established to protect us from those evil people who would otherwise usurp their authority over everybody and make everybody slaves. And that's who these people like Rockefeller are. That's who these people like George Soros are. And Bill Gates, Melinda Gates, and these kind of people. That's who they're supporting. These people are bad, evil people who are basically trying to destroy nation states so that they can have global dominance, a global government they believe is going to save the world because they believe in humanism. They believe in secular humanism. They don't believe that God is in control. They don't believe that God established enough for us to have this. They believe this world's going to run out of materials and somehow their kingdom is going to collapse. They believe they're God. They can do it better than anybody else, which is a lie. And it's a deception by the great puppet master Satan himself, which is seducing these people ultimately to bring about the rise of the Antichrist and the rise of the end and the final kingdom, which is going to rise. It's going to have total dominance over the world, and it's going to enslave mankind through this economic system which will be a marking system of some sort in the hand, right hand, or in the forehead, the Bible talks about in Revelation 13. That's coming. It's very soon. That's why I think they're trying to destroy the dollar. If you destroy the currency, the global currency, which is the dollar in essence, you have to bring it in with something else to replace it. If the global currency is fine and stable and there's no problem with it, you don't need to bring in anything else. And that's why I think they're purposely trying to destroy the dollar. They're being used and manipulated by Satan and the dark, sinister forces, spiritual forces that are out there. And that's why we have a president who, you think about it, he says he doesn't want to support Israel. He doesn't want to give them the means to go in and put an end to this evil terrorist organization, which would end it. And yes, civilians will die. In any war, civilians die, especially in a terrorist one who embeds itself into civilian society, which is what Hamas has done, which, by the way, is an international crime. And now they're trying to say that Israel may have committed an international crime. It's a threat. It's a threat to somehow I can put more sanctions on it. And by the way, it was this President Biden who basically put sanctions on the Israeli soldiers, not the terrorists who committed the crimes. He didn't sanction anybody. He didn't sanction any of them. He sanctioned the Israeli soldiers who were trying to defend their people from these terrorists called Hamas. And if it wasn't Hamas, it's PLO and Islamic Jihad and Fatah and whoever else group that's there that self-identifies as some Islamic group that wants to destroy and kill the Jewish people. And the Jewish state they want it destroyed. And they publicly admit that. And yet here he is saying, oh, you got our honor-clad support. If Biden or anybody in the Democratic Party says that you got their without any kind of reservation support, believe me, that's worth the paper is written on. You might as well just throw it right on out the window and burn it. If anything you learn from the Democratic Party is they don't care anything about you. They don't care about you. You're just a tool to vote for them. And if whoever's giving them money, they will dance to that piper. If they're playing the note, giving them money, they will dance that tune. All you have to do is look at them and say, and there's people in the media that are like that. In my opinion, Piers Morgan's like that. I think he's one of those kind of guys. He'll dance to any tune whoever's paying him. Dr. Phil, he'll dance to any tune. He's nobody I would ever trust in my life. He's a worthless guy to media. But people list him and I'm always like shocked. The guy's been caught lying I don't know how many times and stuff that you sit there and you go, what in the world? Why would anybody believe this guy? Here he is. And people believe it. Same thing with the President Biden. His guy's been totally caught lying I don't know how many times. He's untrustworthy. His word is meaningless. How he's not in prison and his son is unbelievable to me. It shows you that the Republican Party is completely untrustworthy. They get up there and they dance about how, they're just going to do all this stuff. If you just vote for them and give money to them, they're completely worthless. They're clowns, all of them. And that's why I say never put your faith and confidence in a political party. Never put your faith and confidence in man. Just like the Bible talks about. It warns you that. So you can bank on one thing. You cannot believe anything that any man's going to tell you, especially if he's a politician. And these people are completely corrupt. And that's why America is declining and it is falling apart. But you got a president who's basically saying, look, you got my support. Okay. And then he says, I'm going to take away the support because you're going into Rafah. Okay, well, either you're completely ignorant to realize that at some point, as the Jews go in to destroy them, which you said you were supporting them doing, and then as they finally get to the point where they're going to destroy them, finally they've gone through and destroyed everything. Oh, we can't have you do that because you're killing too many civilians and it just might hurt too many civilians. Well, what do you think was going to happen? I mean, he sits in meetings and gets private information in these meetings all the time, more than what we would have. But all of us know if you're going to be in a war with somebody and you're going into a civilian areas, that civilians are going to be killed, especially if you're putting your missiles and your bombs and your hostages inside tunnels underneath civilian buildings, underneath hospitals, in schools. And there's tons of videos where you can see where these people are doing that. The reason why they built these tunnels, they used to do kidnappings before and they would build tunnels. So they knew why they had them. It wasn't like it was an accident. And putting all these tunnels underneath civilian buildings, what do you think is going to happen? You got to bomb those tunnels. You got to bomb those places where they got missiles and bombs and so forth, and their fighters are at. So either you were completely ignorant, or you're just completely untrustworthy that you knew it was going to happen, but you're going to get to a certain point and say, well, I'm only going to back so far, and after that, I'm not. It just shows how completely worthless American politicians are and absolutely how worthless Biden is, and anybody who would support him. You have to be a complete freaking fool to believe these guys. These are the same people that tolerate and put up with people. Black Lives Matter burning down buildings and towns and cities. Didn't do anything. Told the police to stand down, in essence, is what was happening. And they can say what they want. That was what was happening. Because the police basically didn't do anything. And every one of those cops, every one of those police officers that stood down while they were burning down cities and towns, Black Lives Matter, Antifa, and all these people, they should all have been removed from office. And whoever comes into power should ultimately remove every single one. They should all be fired, and they shouldn't get no lifetime retirements. That should be removed, absolutely. The retirement should be removed. Their pension should be removed. The health care that they were counting on and taking all that money and stuff. Why have them if they're not doing anything? They should all be removed. Whoever comes in office, that's the number one thing. Number one, close the public school system, defund them, privatize the school system, get rid of and defund all these public universities and professors. They have to go, and all these professors that are left-leaning liberal wackos, they have to be removed and fired. And that's immediate. That's number one priority you got to do in this country. Whoever comes in, I don't care what they do, I don't care what they threaten you. You have to get rid of the public school system, and you have to get rid of public school teacher unions. They have to be complete. And why you have publicly funded unions anyway? That's completely ridiculous. Because they're basically saying, look, I'm going to give you money from the taxes to pay for you to vote for us the way we want. That's ultimately what's happening. And the average person here, they don't get the benefits. They don't get the stuff that they get. And yet we're forced to pay through our taxes. And we don't, well, you can vote. Voting doesn't do you any good when you got corrupt politicians and you got these crazy people running these teachers unions. It have to be absolutely priority number one, close the teachers union and close these public schools. That's number one. And just do not trust any politician, period, at all, especially if they got a Democrat before their name.